that hospitality and to realize its conditions. They might not have been evident, but they're there. And so she's somebody who's working really towards the idea of thinking through what unconditional hospitality would look like. And of course, it is one of those points at which one can never perfectly arrive. But I think that that sort of framework is really interesting, and I mean, it's interesting to extend it to the non-human guests there. And I think I was thinking about hospitality, a problem that Italy feels is so new. It's really been in the last 20 to 30 years that they've started to think of themselves as multicultural, multiracial, and worry about this issue of how they are welcoming others in their borders. But I think through a post-humanist philosophical model, you can sort of rewind time and sort of let people rethink the way they have always, even coexisting with all kinds of others for a long time. And so I kind of like at least the ecological possibility of rethinking that and sort of redefining themselves in a way that might allow them to get past the extreme discomfort they have with what right now can look like a racist and extremely xenophobic society at certain times. So not to offer a way out, but a way to rethink and maybe reanimate a discussion about something that's so touchy right now in Italy. And I was rereading the story of Jerry Maslow, who was a South African immigrant who got asylum in Italy and then was killed there in a protest movement in the 90s, it was the 90s or the end of the 80s. So there's that sort of a past that includes all of these horrific moments of incredible inhospitality on the part of the Italians, which have sort of continued recently, that makes people very uncomfortable talking about it. So the fact that the films can sort of raise the question and widen it, as I think they do through the animal lens, makes it a way to make more people comfortable in engaging in the dialogue, I think.
How does that correspond to what you're describing in regard to Wind Goes Round as philosophy of praxis, in contrast to a philosophy, I guess you'd call it philosophy of ideas or philosophy of theory. I mean, you talk about Philippe sort of being on an odd border there between the two, and I was wondering how that actually corresponds to your framework with Haraway. I mean, where is she actually situated? Is it praxis or theory? Particularly if, as I understand it, she tends to decry, in no uncertain terms, certain kinds of philosophies that theorize, in her humble opinion, and that would presume that she's more to the praxis side, but it would seem that she's just as theoretical in her own way as these philosophies that she decries. So I'm sort of wondering, I mean, it's two different questions. One in terms of what you were just saying there, but also in terms of the broader theoretical framework.
Well, Haraway is, I mean, I think she is definitely on a slippery slope between theory and praxis. She would say she lives it with her dog, who she writes about all the time, and is at the center of the Companion Species Manifesto. She talks about spit exchange with her dog. I mean, some of the parts will make you cringe a little bit as you read them if you don't let your dog kiss you. I mean, so she's talking about a very real cohabitation with this animal and sort of encouraging people to think through real relationships, and she says mundane relationships that they have, and their everyday lives with these significant others of whatever type they may be. So I know she attacks Deleuze's wolves and the wolf pack, saying Deleuze doesn't necessarily know how wolves live, and is so dismissive of the companion animals. She actually loves Deleuze in general, but has a big problem with the wolf pack, and says loves Freud in that moment because she wants the dog that's sort of sitting around her living room or existing with her on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's this sort of philosophy of the mundane that she's trying to propose, which I find compelling, especially in films that are extremely attentive to the day-to-day in their unraveling. These films are often, I always have hesitations about showing them to American students, although I do, because the pacing is so different from American films. There's something very mundane about the pacing and duration of everyday scenes that ends up making them feel slow. I mean, students will sometimes say they're boring, but it sort of has that living with, the being with, that I think corresponds well to that idea of the film as the practice of that sort of mundane being together with something. And I was headed towards your other question, which is about Philippe and how he puts it.
It's just how just really where that. I
Where
guess I want to know if the other one, The Right Distance, has that kind of dichotomy
between praxis and theory. I think less so, and perhaps because it doesn't have the philosopher at its center, but it does have the problem between one kind of everyday life in theory, and I keep getting back to the idea of Italiani brava gente, something that people at Italianist meetings talk about a lot, is something Italians will say about themselves. Oh, we're, brava gente, we're good folks. And there's sort of the superficial everyday hospitality, inviting them for coffee, the sort of conditional, but very warm, very generous experience of hospitality on the one hand, and then I think that the praxis in that case is the unconditional or less conditional hospitality that would extend to the moments when it's less hard to be good folks altogether. And I think both of those films get at, they start out in apparently idyllic, not perfect villages, but these places where you'd love to go visit and, you'd love to talk to the local barman. And they all push up against that limit where you discover that the philosophies that they all believe they're practicing, the case of the historical Redo, but also the sort of, we love people, we love our neighbors, we're generous and good citizens, they bump up against the limits of that, and then that's where you discover that what they're actually practicing is something superficial that doesn't withstand the tests of something that's a little bit more controversial, a little more difficult, that less conditional hospitality. So I think on the one hand, Philippe creates his own problems. He's also certainly not an ideal figure in any way, but I see the problem between praxis and philosophy sort of on the other side, especially of these communities that are supposedly welcoming people and in fact not doing so very effectively. Not sure if that exactly answers your question, but I keep thinking about it. So.
At least inexactly.
I kind of want to tie this idea of praxis and hospitality, and originally hospitality is a concept that is developed between people only. And I'm just kind of curious how biologists, as Haraway, would see this possibility of exchange, because we are trying to move away from the binary distinction, inferiority, superiority, and yet how is the other perceiving this idea of hospitality, of sharing, of exchange? Because it looks to me that it's mainly seen through the point of view of a human, what the human is getting out of the exchange. And I was just wondering if the scientific world addresses the question of the other, and how is the other participating in this exchange, and what is the other, the non-human other, is getting out of the exchange?
Well, a lot of her idea of hospitality, and I believe this is in some ways sort of dealt with in the Derrida as well, is it has to do with a sort of empathy. That's what actually Marchesini calls it, empathy over sympathy, but an anticipating and a guessing at what the other needs or wants. Mm-hmm. And Haraway is extremely attentive to the idea that you have to listen to the other, in her case her dog, to figure out the sorts of things that it needs, or in order to live happily on its own terms. And so as a dog owner, she trains agility dogs who get to go to these contests with her, and who she plays with. She walks all the time. Actually, Alexander Day in history used to live down the street from her and saw her all the time with her dog. So I think that it does involve an ethical responsibility to attempt to listen to the other side of the equation.